Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
And good afternoon, evening, morning, whatever time it is, if you are listening live or somewhere in the future, listening to this recorded in the On X archive. Peter Robbins here, and the show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. It's January, late January. It's kind of cold up here in New York State, but we are going to warm you up tonight. This show is one of my favorite kinds of shows because it deals with UFOs, the paranormal, aspects of the paranormal, but coupled with creativity. As regular listeners and viewers know, we've had as guests painters, film directors, writers, screenwriters, museum curators, photographers, musicians, and other people who live their life in the arts or partially in the arts. And tonight's guest falls in that category. Interested in the paranormal from a very young age, Eric Mintel has led the Eric Mintel Investigates program since 2016, which seeks out strange stories to share with his audiences, be they about ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, dogmen, and other anomalous phenomena. But equally interesting to me was when I learned that for more than 30 years, Eric Mintel has been an acclaimed jazz musician with his group, the Eric Mintel Quartet. In fact, his mentor was the legendary Dave Brubeck. Most nights, of course, he investigates the paranormal, but twice he's been invited to perform at the White House, and he has been invited to perform at the Kennedy Center more than 10 times, also doing a special concert at the United Nations. He has toured and performed all over the country in concert halls, high schools, libraries, elementary schools, churches, jazz clubs, and many more venues. A consummate professional in front of the camera, he also has stories written up on his paranormal activities by numerous newspapers and has been featured on radio stations and podcasts across the world. Fans of his music have followed him into the paranormal world. On many an investigation, Eric and his team have gotten groundbreaking footage and captured strange paranormal activity rarely seen before. And it is a pleasure to welcome back Eric Mintel to Meanwhile Here on Earth. Eric, welcome back.
I'm a legend in my own mind. But no,
I know that one. How goes it tonight?
It goes very well. You said creativity. It's been a very, very creative. Last year was a very creative year. This year is even becoming more of a creative year. The last couple of months of last year, with my jazz quartet, we were traipsing all up and down the Eastern Seaboard, performing, sold out concert halls, and it was just so great to see. And I say that not to boast. I say that because for 30 years I've been wanting to bring more jazz to the masses, and it was just so great to see those audiences packed to the rafters, enjoying music together again, which was just so much fun. And I mean, every single concert from, all of it from south to the north, we were in New Hampshire, and it was just a lot of fun, and we made a lot of people happy, and that makes me happy.
I think the word jazz can be a misnomer for a lot of people. They have one particular kind of sound or music or one particular set of musicians or one attitude in their mind, it's probably one of the most broad-based and biggest tent genres of music in the world,
Yeah.
and innately American. Um, One of Ken Burns' best documentaries, as you're more than aware, and as I know a lot of our viewers are, was called Jazz.
Mhm.
And it was brilliant. I mean, he is our consummate documentary filmmaker, but even if you thought you knew the territory, you learned a lot.
Oh yeah.
Um, for me, um, my when I first encountered jazz as a teenager, it was more in the realm of Gershwin and early uh, um, Count Basie
Mhm.
and Louis Armstrong. But then, we swing all the way to the other side to people like Miles Davis, and
Sure.
it's it's organic. And we'll talk about how you kind of got into it, but let's begin at the beginning, as I often like to do. Where were you born, Eric?
I was born in Plainfield, New Jersey, and 1967, and you know, only child, so parents only had one. They broke the mold when they made me, so so. But what? Yeah, and then we moved from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, into Bucks County, Pennsylvania, in 1970, and have been in Bucks County, Pennsylvania ever since.
Um, your folks, did they both work, or was your mom more traditional stay-at-home mom?
No, my mom was a, believe it or not, first grade school teacher for 40 plus years. She
Wow,
was teaching before I was born, and
beautiful.
and my dad did. He was actually a bunch of different jobs, but he was mainly a jeweler. He used to work with fine jewels and diamonds and things like that, and then also went into refurbishing and tuning pianos.
Neat. Did you, well, let me put it this way. We all begin to really own the skill of reading at different ages. For me, being dyslexic, I was about 8 when it all really clicked into place. And then, I've had a book in my hand ever since.
Yeah.
Some people don't grow up in reading families. It's more visual imagery, film, television, is the passion. When you started to master reading and could start to go beyond the Dick and Jane and read what you wanted to read, what kinds of books were you drawn to?
That's a good question because early on, I was just talking about this the other day. There was a great school, and it's actually really only right up the street where I went to elementary school. It was called Bridgeton Elementary, and now it's called the Waldorf School. But that school really nurtured creativity. And I remember being in kindergarten, first grade, and gravitating toward paranormal books, ghost stories, and things like that. Alfred Hitchcock, he used to have these novels, right? Ghost
Yeah.
stories for young, right? Ghost stories for young people. I remember bringing into show and tell in second grade, and I still have the record. Alfred Hitchcock's Ghost Stories for Young People, and putting that record out.
Wow.
And it was just so something spoke to me. And I remember my mom kept, and I can't find them now, but I used to write stories. I used to write like these little books, these little stories. So I would always be writing and creating. I think they wanted to advance me a grade in elementary school, but my mom and dad kept me, where I was. As it was, I graduated early. I was like 17 when I graduated. I started, since my birthday's in October,
Right.
I started kindergarten when I was like 4.5.
Oh boy. Okay.
So, but yeah, no, those were
I'll
the
be
books that
damned.
I gravitated toward.
I don't think I've ever had a guest that's told me that. Dare I ask then, when you was your introduction to the world of film on television, or did the folks take you out to the movie theater occasionally or on your own? And let me guess what kind of movies you were drawn to at first.
Well, it was funny, Peter. Since my mom and dad had worked when I was younger, I was what they call that latchkey kid. So I would come home from elementary school, the bus would drop you off. I'd be by myself. I'd be in the house by myself, and I'd be in front of the TV. So I saw all those shows from the 70s, Mannix and, Barnaby Jones and all those things. Columbo.
They're
So,
great.
yeah, which I still watch today. But, so I remember being fascinated by that kind of stuff. And just like, and that was the other thing too. And, today, in today's world, parents that did that, having their kid at home, what would happen now. But it was fine. We had upstairs neighbor, and but I remember always, being home, being at the TV, and just so those shows and being there, and it was probably a creative environment that I was putting myself in that creative environment. And being an only child, you've got to create your own activity. You've got to create your own environment. And I wound up doing that very, very early when
Interesting. The shows you've just described, although not paranormal, are all
Right.
mystery shows.
Yeah.
And that thread of mystery, of course, runs through what we do. Where was it? When was it? How was it that you first really picked up on or became deeply interested in or involved in music
Well,
of any kind?
I'll tell you this. We come from a very musical family where my father's side of the family was more or less blue collar, so to speak. But my mom's side of the family, my uncle Don Ciccone was part of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. So he was, yeah. So I mean, you've heard of those guys, right? So, so Don was, he was a bass player with them from 1972 to 1982. So he was on all those hit records like, Oh, What a Night, December 63, and
Oh my God.
Who Loves You. They went all over the world with that. And
Of course.
and I mean, in my performing, probably it formed my performing, life, where we went to some of those concerts, which we were invited to because it was my mom's brother. We were backstage talking to, to Frankie Valli, and
How exciting.
it was incredible. And I remember it must have been like 1975. We were at Madison Square Garden, and it was Frankie Valli and Casey and the Sunshine Band. And and oh my God, I remember just to this day, there was a girl that was just crying, like just sobbing.
Oh.
And she's pointing to me going, please give this. She had a little like package. Please give this to Casey. Please give this to Casey. So my uncle saw that. I took it from her. We went to the dressing room, and there they were in the dressing room. And I remember to this day, they had all the bell-bottom pants on and the high-heeled shoes. And it was just such a wild memory. But, it was just, all that entertainment factor. And then, and then later on, when I started playing the piano in earnest and playing Brubeck, and my dad would wake me up at like 2, 3 in the morning and play for his friends that he brought home that night. So that's another story for another time.
You didn't go to music school or a conservatory. How do you remember when you first got your hands on an instrument, and what was it that compelled you to have an idea of what, again, you're growing up in a family who've got some amazing musical influences, but it's one thing to be a fan and enjoy listening. It's another thing to say, I want to learn how to play. Was it a piano that you were drawn to at first?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we didn't have much, but we had a piano in the house, which was a little baby grand piano, and it was in tune most of the time. But my parents would find me at that piano, and we had it even when I was a baby, but they would find me at the piano at like 3 or 4 years old, just sitting there, and I'm just fascinated by the sound. And so then, later on, obviously my Uncle Don, he was also a Brubeck fan. He says this, but I'm not sure if it's true or not, but he said he had a group called the Knights of Brubeck. And this is back in the 60s. He also, your listeners would probably know this too. He had a group called the Critters, and he sang Mr. Dyingly Sad. That was his hit tune. And younger girl. And so he was a huge, he was a huge Dave Brubeck fan too. So he would come over to the house and play Take Five and Blue Rondo a la Turk and Three to Get Ready, just all little snippets. He wouldn't play the whole tune, but it was enough for me to be like, wow, this is really cool. Let me see if I can. So that was like an early impression, I think. And then later on, I just was like, wow, I really want to learn this. And that's how it really happened from that piano when I was little. And then I played some piano for friends, and they liked what I was doing, and that was encouraging. And so it just kind of was like one progression to the next.
Were you listening to records to start to get these sounds in your head? And if so, what kind of records were around the house? Were they more Frankie Valli or more jazz or more classical or?
A lot, that's a great question too. A lot of what they had in the house at that time, I was listening to Ray Charles, a lot of rhythm and blues things. Elvis, my mom was a big Elvis fan. And so Elvis, and then a lot of, Bobby Darin, a lot of those tunes back in, all old 45s. They have an old 45, all these old 45s. So that's what I was listening to. And I just, and then one day I found this old 45 with Take Five and Blue Rondo a la Turk on
my.
And that's when I put the record on. And I just, when you have that light bulb that goes off and says, this is what I want to do. And that was it. And I wanted to learn everything I could on Dave Brubeck. And because that was the record, it was Dave Brubeck Quartet. And then there was another one too, It's a Raggy Waltz and Unsquare Dance. And those songs, they spoke to me, and wanted to learn everything I could on Dave Brubeck, got all of his records at the time. And we're talking like, this is about 1982. So I was like 14, and then took a year's worth of piano lessons, really only took a year's worth of lessons, but I'm coming to the lessons playing Blue Rondo a la Turk, Take Five, and all this obscure Brubeck music. And my piano teacher's trying to teach me Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So he said, I can't teach you any further. So that's it. I pretty much have been self-taught since then. And time in the field over the years, all the guys that have come with me in the groups over the years, and the group that's with me now for 20 plus years that we played together, there have been some great teachers as well. But yeah, it's just it's that part of that kind of playing to me is paranormal, because where does it come from? And it's like, that's the only time I feel like sometimes I'm in the moment is during that improvisation. It's something that just, it's out of the ether, and then boom, right into the fingers to the piano.
Yeah. Let's go back a little bit. Let me ask you, it's one thing to have a really entrenched interest in a really cool subject like ghosts.
Yeah.
And the Alfred Hitchcock, besides being a weird ball and having a dark side for sure, he was a brilliant director, of course. And he was also a great self-promoter. And I think all of us old enough to remember the weekly television show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Yeah.
Just some of those were absolute gems, right up there with the quality of, say, The Twilight Zone or Outer Limits, or some of these classic half-hour genre shows. But it's another thing to have a real mystery in your life or paranormal experience. Had you had any kind of non-standard ghost, UFO, paranormal kind of experience in your life by the time you were an adolescent, or it was more an intellectual interest?
Well, there was a few things. And to go back to what you said about those shows, I think it was about the writing too. The writing was incredible.
Brilliant. Exactly. It all goes back to the writing.
Oh my God. And they would always twist at the end. You think it's going one way, then it's going another way. But yeah, I had an experience myself. Now, I don't know if it was a dream or what, but it was very early on. I could remember waving to my parents, like they were going out one night. Whether or not I was alone or not, I'm not sure.
About how old were you when you're about to describe this experience?
Maybe about 6, 7 years old, maybe.
Please continue.
Around there. And I waved goodbye to them out the window, and I happened to turn back and look down the hallway, and I see this shadow coming down the hallway, and it was like almost like it was dancing, but I couldn't make any form out to it. But that was something that really just kind of like stuck with me for years. Now, who knows? It could have been the babysitter. I don't know. So it was just one of those things that I don't remember consciously but I do remember that part of it. And then, and then my father would always have stories that I think that he was really connected to the paranormal world too, as a psychic, because, my father could sit down at the piano and play like play anything. My mother took 10 years worth of piano lessons and couldn't really play too much. So he had that innate talent. And, unfortunately, he was an alcoholic and he never really came up to his full potential. But he could fix anything. He could do anything he wanted to. But it was the booze that really got him in the end. But he could sit down and play. But he had stories that he would he was adamant, even on his deathbed a couple of years ago. I asked him again. I said, "Dad, did this really happen?" And he said he came home one night. He would had a habit, not a lot, but he'd have a habit of coming home very late. And this particular night, he says he was stone sober, and it was that night in the early 70s. And we lived in a house that overlooked the Delaware River down here in Bucks County, in a place called Upper Black Eddy. It's just maybe about 15 miles or so above New Hope, if you're familiar with that area of Bucks County. So he's sitting there and he's got a steak that he's cooking on the little hibachi. And he said he looks over at the water and sees a woman. It looks like a woman in white floating down the river, like walking on the water. And when she turned to look at him, he said that her face came right up to his from like a quarter of a mile away. And it came up to this way and then went back, and she kept floating down the river. And as she's floating, she's saying, "I'm going home. I'm going home." And he said you could hear this like just echoing through the valley. And he had told that story for years. And he's had other stories of ghosts and UFOs. So, of course, listening to that, hearing those stories growing up, of course, I'm interested in that as well.
Eric, other than your initial interest in ghost aspect of the paranormal, do you remember the first time as a kid that you had any take on or reference to or heard about this thing called UFOs?
Probably my first inkling was Close Encounters, the movie. That was probably around the time that I was like young there too. I was only like maybe 9, 10 years old at that point. And just learning about, wow, this movie was phenomenal. But then coming, finding out later that, wow, people have really had these experiences, and these things could really exist. So that's probably the earliest memory of that. And then later on, of course, in life, had my own experience with that as well.
By the time you're in high school, no matter what these extracurricular passions are, were you practical enough or insecure enough, or insecure is not the word, but I know for myself as a talented visual artist who dreamt of being, a fine artist, I realized that, like being an actor, the odds of having that work out were odds. And that if I was going to study, I should probably learn things like layout and paste up and children's book illustration and, practical aspects of the arts, which I did before going on to art school. But did you feel by the time you were in high school that your future lay in being a musician, or that there was some trade or profession that you were kind of thinking in terms of ending up doing?
And let me say, you are a phenomenal artist too, by the way. So it's funny because I didn't really have that kind of inkling at that point. I knew I loved to play, and I knew that I loved the instrument and I loved everything about Dave Brubeck and listened to a lot of other players. I listened to Oscar Peterson, Duke Ellington, Art Tatum, Chick Corea, all those guys. But when I was in high school, I was in I was in music class, and again, I'm sitting there as the kids are coming in. I'm sitting there playing Take Five, the Blue Rondo in the class, and the piano and the teacher was just kind of like, "Okay, everybody, go to their seats." he just had no. I just kind of slipped through the cracks that way because I don't think he didn't even want to take that on. You know, he didn't want to think that, my God, this kid's better than I am. You know, and that wasn't where I was coming from. I was just like, I was just happy to be, playing that and maybe get some kind of direction. It's funny, there's another music teacher later on that's followed my group that was part of that class. And now he's followed us for years. And he always asks me, he's like, why didn't he take an interest in that? I said, I have no idea. But yeah, I just kind of like, for years, I was formulating the idea of like trying to get a quartet together, because obviously I wanted to, not be a clone of Dave Brubeck, but I wanted to do like tunes by Dave Brubeck. And it took probably a good 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, even longer, to even get my first group going. And how that happened, it just took time. I was doing like from high school. I didn't go to college. It's probably one of my regrets. I should have gone to college, but I didn't. I was working and did a lot of different jobs. But and then I formulated my group in 1993. So it was I went to a jam session and found some musicians, and about a year or two before that, I had been perfecting those Dave Brubeck tunes myself. And so now I said, well, now it's time to get a group together. Let's get a group together and let's do a tribute to Dave Brubeck. And that's what and those guys, thankfully, were very into it as well. And we had our very first concert November 12th of 1993. And it was at a college, and it was about 400 or 500 people showed up, standing ovation. And I was like, I am not turning back. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. That's the fact that you remember the date like that says it all. Curious to know, even though you really saw your star as somewhere in the world of jazz, at no point, like most guys your age at that point, did you want to, pick up an electric guitar and be a rocker? Or did that even remotely enter into your transom at all?
You know what? No.
Answered question. As far as appreciation of other kinds of music, even if you knew that you weren't going to want to do it. For me, when I think about my evolution just as somebody appreciating music, lucky enough to grow up with, classic rock, Motown, rhythm and blues, jazz, mostly old-fashioned jazz, getting into rock and roll. I also was exposed to opera, Gilbert and Sullivan, madrigal singing, barbershop quartet, classical music. Did you have an opportunity to learn to just appreciate or be intrigued by these other completely foreign areas of music that, you weren't going to be performing, or that you weren't passionate about to perform, but that you appreciate? Well, you know what I mean.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. No, I had a lot of those influences too. I mean, I was listening to some of the pop stuff in the 80s, Men at Work and people like that, because that was kind of like my era, like Bon Jovi kinds of things, and, stuff like that was on the radio. I wasn't like listening to that stuff religiously, but I was listening to like classical stuff too. I was listening to Chopin, Bach, Beethoven, and trying to learn some things that way. I think my very first piano recital was Moonlight Sonata, because even though I did take that year's worth of piano lessons, I was able to do a recital. And I remember my dad came with me and he did that, and we went to the recital. And I remember messing up a little bit in that recital. And I remember my dad saying, look, just keep going. Whatever you do, just keep going.
Yes.
And I did. And then it's kind of like now with jazz, it's kind of like jazz is, you had said it earlier, there's people that are exposed to jazz, right, that might not necessarily like it. If they are exposed to that avant-garde type of jazz right out of the gate, they're not like Ornette Coleman or somebody like that. They're not going to like that. I mean, I got to be honest with you. And sometimes I don't like it, because if you don't have a beginning, middle, or end to follow,
Yeah.
it's going to turn people off. Unfortunately, that's why a lot of people are not very familiar with jazz or even give jazz a chance, because that kind of jazz has gotten a bad rap. That kind of jazz is very cool if you can get into. It's very cerebral, so if you can get into that, but that's way out. But what I like to do, and taking that model from Dave Brubeck, is that melody-based jazz, where you've got a very strong melody, and that's something that people can follow and that they can latch onto. Many a time after a concert, people have come up and said, I don't like jazz. I really never liked jazz, but I like your music.
Yeah.
And it just tells me it's the way we present it.
I wasn't, the first time I heard Chick Corea, Return to Forever, and I think I was already in college, and I remember as a teenager, though, I was bookish and a bit of a nerd, and I liked being seen as, I guess, a bit of an eccentric. And I remember how excited I got with the backstory of the first performance of Rhapsody in Blue, that the Paul Whiteman Orchestra in like December of 1927 at Town Hall on a night where the weather was awful. They premiered it, and the audience reaction to that amazing piece of music was overwhelming. Or the first time I heard Slaughter on 10th Avenue, or Duke Ellington and the great Billy Strayheim music, Take the A Train. These things electrified me. And then again, going back to the early Count Basie stuff from the 20s and Louis Armstrong from the 20s, and realizing this is jazz. This music I can relate to. And it was, of all people, my Russian grandmother who opened that world for me, listening to the radio with her while she'd make things, wonderful things in her kitchen in Queens. And a lot of Russian immigrants, certainly coming over, like during the First World War, they related to the Black American experience. And Nana was completely in love with all these jazz musicians. It was a wonderful way to kind of enter into it. But again, you're in two worlds, really. And when did there came a time when UFO phenomena actually entered into your life, when you had a sighting or somebody you knew had an experience? Can you tell us a little about your introduction to that subject beyond the intellectual?
Sure. Yeah. I think the first paranormal experience I had was in about 1997, and I was on my way to a gig, and going down this road out here that's in Bucks County. It's a dark. We have a lot of dark roads here in Bucks County. So I'm going down. It's February. It's cold. It's a little wet outside. I think it was a little rainy, and I'm racing to this gig, and I'm going down there. Not pitch black. And all of a sudden, I'm going down the road, and all of a sudden, bam, a deer runs out, and I hit it. And I'm like, oh my God, I felt felt so terrible. Never had that happen before. Yeah. So I hit this thing. There's no way I could react to it. So as I hit it, we both, the deer and the car, and me and the deer, were sliding like 60 feet. And we stop, and I'm like, look, and I get out of the car. I'm looking at this deer. No one's on the road. It's pitch black, and I'm looking at this deer in the headlights there, and this thing's deader than a doornail, and I'm feeling so bad. And out of the woods, I hear a woman's voice. And now keep in mind, I'm a piano player. I hear a woman's voice ask me, "How's your hands?" And I turned around and I looked, and here this woman comes out of the woods and grabs this 200-pound deer by the ear and drags it off the road like it's nothing, and says to me, "You better get in your car and get off the road." And I was just, so when you see somebody that's standing in headlights, right, that's kind of blurry, That's what she looked like. And it was like this blurry figure. And she picked this deer up. And I went back, I went to the gig, and I was like, I was just freaked out. And I went and told the guys, and they were like, my God, what? So I went back the next day thinking maybe there's, you know, in my rational mind, I'm like, well, maybe there's a house back here. Maybe,
Right.
maybe there's a woman in the woods that just spooked this deer. And that's what happened.
Right.
So I went back there. There was no houses around whatsoever. It was all woods, nothing around. There's houses now, but you know, the last few years they've been built. But back then, nothing. And I'll never forget that. That was like yesterday it happened.
Hmm.
And then with the UFO thing, exciting, in Sherry and I were going over this bridge called the Stockton, New Jersey Bridge from Center Bridge, Pennsylvania, which is outside of New Hope. She lived in Stockton, New Jersey at the time. And we're going over this bridge back to her house. And all of a sudden, we're going over the Delaware. We're washing across the Delaware. And we're going over the bridge. And out of the corner of my eye, I see these 5 orange orbs just showed up out of nowhere. And they looked like swirling lava. It was this weird. So they appeared. And then within this like 5-second time frame, right? In my rational mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, could they be Chinese lanterns? There's a restaurant there. Maybe someone's getting married and they just sent them off. You know? And I was like, no, it's February. No, it was January of 2016. It's cold. And it was a Wednesday night. There's nobody getting married on a Wednesday. So all of a sudden these things just appeared, and Sherry saw them clear as a bell. And they made it looked like they did a search pattern over the river. And then one by one, they just disappeared. They just, you know, dissipated. And it was weird. And then I was able to get one shot, one picture. And I'll have to send that to you because it was just the most wildest thing. But I think even in that picture, you could see just all of those orbs just starting to dim. But that's something that I cannot explain to this day. I remember John Keel talking about the living lights. You know, was that kind
That's
of
right. Yeah. Going back to the world of music from a young age, this one particular musician resonated with you more than anyone else, a man named Dave Brubeck. It's one thing to be a fan, to be a young aspiring musician and working in the manner of a certain musician, to feel what it's like to do that. It's another thing to have that person enter into your life, as Dave Brubeck did into yours. Please share with us how this happened.
Well, Dave, you know, it was the first time I think I met Dave so I was introduced to his music in 1982. The first time I met him was 1990 at a place called the Keswick Theater outside of Philadelphia, and went to go see him in concert. And
this was the first time you had seen him live in concert?
Live in concert.
It's a big deal. Okay, keep going.
He's already 70 years old, you know, or maybe
and still kicking musical ass.
60, he was 60. Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. 70 and just unbelievable. And it was just one of these like life transforming nights. And I'll tell you, man, I went backstage and met him. Of course, I'm like, you know, the wide-eyed fan. And I gave him some tapes that I had at the time, some recordings that I made. And Dave was gracious. What a gracious guy he was. He took them. And you know, like a month or two later, I get a letter back from Dave saying that he listened and he really enjoyed the CDs. This is what people are missing, I think, these days, is having a really good mentor in their lives. And Dave was that for me. He was somebody that I really wanted to aspire to.
I want to ask you right now, it's one thing to the experience you're describing right now, but there's a synapse. There's a moment where you decide, I've got to meet this guy. And it's not going to happen if I don't initiate something. How do I get backstage to connect with this human being? Because if I don't do it now, I may never. And if I do it now, who knows what my life will be like? What happened? What did you do?
Well, I went up to the manager, I guess, at that point, and I just was like, is Dave around? I just, is Dave around? So and he's just said, yeah, come on back, and
Okay.
that's the thing in life, Peter, right?
A lot of managers wouldn't do that.
Well, this is something in life that I think people don't do sometimes, and you could
Take a
attest.
chance.
Take
Make
a
it
chance.
happen.
Exactly, and ask, because if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. So that's something that early on I learned. But you're right. I think I had that wherewithal that I was like, I was a fan, man. I just really wanted to meet this guy and meet your heroes, And sometimes if you meet your heroes, that could also go bad too sometimes.
Yes.
But thankfully, in Dave's case, it was wonderful, and he was just a phenomenal
So
guy.
he writes you back a letter.
Writes me a letter, says that he enjoyed listening to the tape that I had, and thank you so much for sending it. And then said they were getting ready to go on a 5-week tour to Europe, and so this was Dave back in the early '90s. He was still touring extensively all over the world, and but about and I would go to concerts maybe every time he was in town. He was in the Philadelphia area. I would go out to see him. So about I think it was around 2002 when we did our very first record as a quartet. I think the record was called Hopscotch. Dave wrote liner notes for that. I asked Dave if he'd be interested in writing any liner notes, because over the years I had sent him some more music, and in some of the letters he had said every time, and this extensive thing that he wrote about this review of this record, but I used a little blurb from it saying, as long as the music attracts dedicated young musicians like Eric Mintel, jazz will continue to thrive and progress as a voice of freedom. Dave Brubeck. I know, right? So talk about I'm blown away. This guy is saying that about me. So very blessed that way. It's just, and also I believed in, and I still do, in what we do and what I want to do with jazz. And and Dave was really the guy that was really the force behind that, and trying to do that. And Dave was saying to me, you're doing it the right way. You're building it from the ground up, and you're going to have staying power doing that, by doing, and that's what I've done ever since. I've been, and I never went for the record labels or anything like that. I've done everything that I've done, Peter, has always been on my own.
I think a lot of younger musicians or people who have aspired to have a career in music, to form, more conventionally, a band, and pull together the right people. I watched my sister repeatedly over the years build a band, and after a year and ready to go for that major contract, one player, I love you, Helen, but in case Twisted Sisters asked me to join them, or the Dictators of this group or whatever, and bang, you missed the gold ring again. How did you build your ensemble? And you guys have been together a long time. That's not the normal rule of things in the music business.
It's all that wonderful money that I'm paying them.
There you go. And that's what they're in it for, just like you.
Exactly. Oh, man. Oh, I wish that was the case. Now, it's, and thank you for saying that, because it is true. It's for years, I guess when I started my group, I had many players that did come in and out of the group for years. But solidly, this group now that has been with me since 2000. So 24 years.
Wow.
Dave Antonow, bass player friend of mine, we've played 24 years together. He's not in my group regularly now, but he and I still play together. When my bass player Jack can't do it, Jack's been with me about 12 years now. Nelson, my saxophone player, has been with me 18 years, and the drummer's been with me almost 25 years.
Wow.
So I say when I tell the audiences that we're celebrating 30 years as a leader of my jazz quartet, I said, this band's been together 20 of those years. We've been together longer than most marriages. And it's so true. and we enjoy playing. That's the other thing. It's like I
It
looked
has
around.
to be. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
What could
absolutely.
be, I've seen it in the visual arts over the years, a particular painter, and I can give you some names that you would know, well-known people in the world of modern art who are hugely successful financially, but kind of trapped in that their creativity has been arrested because their market value is based on producing a product that is bankable, that
Hmm.
people want to see, and they don't want them to be changing their style,
Oh,
or
I get it.
and
Yeah.
it's kind of a bird in a gilded cage situation. The fact that you're free to keep doing what you're doing, and you have an audience that follows your evolution, so to say. What I'd like to do now is for you to set up for us. We have two clips. We're going to listen to one in the second hour, but to ask my amazing producer, Ray Hobbs, to set up the first one now as you tell us what we're about to listen to, where it was recorded, and about any background material that you'd like us to know before we listen to it.
I think you're going to probably play a concert from the Sellersville Theater recently. Yeah, that was a concert we did just about a year and a half ago, and it was we were doing a tribute to Dave Brubeck, and I think this is just my solo section of the blues part of Blue Rondo a la Turk, and this is how we interact as a group. A lot of people say, do you guys rehearse that stuff? We never rehearse. This stuff,
Ah,
because
wow.
everyone's listening. That's another thing with the paranormal. Everything always, the senses are going at once.
That's so interesting. For most musical forms, of course, um, rehearsal is absolutely necessary. But of course, the whole nature of a certain type of jazz is improvisational, and there
Right.
is no way to rehearse improvising. I mean, you can just improvise, but it's going to come out different each time. Um, okay, Race, would you let her rip? That was great fun. Oh my gosh.
And
Wow.
that's what we do. We get the crowd going, and that stuff just happens, and a lot of times it's the listening factor of everything. And there's a lot more things that happen within a performance too. And you could hear my bass player in the background laughing because we're just like having such a great time. And that's so important to me too, because that spills over into the audience,
Yeah.
and they fuel us along too. So it's a happy marriage.
That you've hit on something so essential to the core of what we're talking about here, creativity and the desire to paint, to make music, to act, to capture beautiful images with the camera, or nowadays with your phone. It's driven by a desire to do it because you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And it is, well, there's an irony to the fact that, again, certain successful artists lose it. Um, they're professional, they're paid, they're making their living, they're following the dream that they thought they had when they were young, and yet they're not enjoying it because they're afraid of compromising the business aspect of it. It's
Yeah.
it comes off. You feel it in what you guys do, even just in that brief clip. Um, we're coming into our last few minutes of the first hour, but one of the things I want to jump right into in the second hour and maybe just set up now is, as mentioned earlier, you have performed in the White House for two different American presidents, President Clinton and President Obama, and gone on to 10 invitations and performances at the Kennedy Center and a concert at the United Nations. These are not standard venues for most, I was going to say magicians. That's beyond Freudian. Uh, close
It
enough.
took the magic tricks to get in there.
And very much so. Certain magicians are musicians and vice versa. Um, your first experience of performing at the White House, they didn't find you, you found them, and you thought the same way. I think I'm going to meet Dave Brubeck. I think I would like to perform at the White House for whoever happens to be president right now. And that is exactly what you did. Begin to talk about that, and I will cut you off at the appropriate moment.
You got it. This was 1998, and I was thinking to myself, well, the group's been, traveling. We're doing colleges, universities. I want to take jazz to the next level. Who could I talk to? So I saw a commercial that night for something at the White House, and I was like, oh man, let me call the White House. So I so I called the White House, and they said, well, you need to talk to the social secretary. So I said, okay. So I called the social secretary. Actually, I wrote to them. I didn't even email at that point. I wrote to them and said, look, the Eric Mintel Quartet would love to perform for the homeless, troops overseas, any kind of positive outreach we could do with jazz. So with that, about a month later, and I just sent a CD we had at the time and some loose press clippings I had. And a month later, I got a call saying, we'd like to invite the Eric Mintel Quartet to the White House for Christmas. I'm like, what? So, and it was a holiday dinner reception, as they said it, for friends and family and foes of the president, Clinton, at the time.
Whoa.
So it was pretty amazing. And then when we come back, I'll tell you how we got this in there the second time. But there's more about the Clinton
Yes,
performance.
I want to find out if he came in and joined you with his saxophone. Don't even let on quite yet. This is Peter Robbins. The program is Meanwhile Here on Earth. My special guest is Eric Mintel, and by extension, the Eric Mintel Quintet. And we will be back in a bit over 4 minutes. Don't go away.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
Wow. As we were saying before, we had to cut to our break. Eric was invited to play at the White House, and we're about to come back and find out a little bit more about how they went. That went. And whatever your politics are, please lay them aside. This is playing for a president of the United States, whomever they may be, and the overwhelming, no, I don't know if novelty is the word, but you guys, you arrive at the White House. What happens from the moment you get there? You don't just walk in. What's the a priori? I've only known a few people who have had an experience even remotely like this, and you've got to go through security, I guess, to some degree, and make sure that you none of your instruments are weaponized.
Well, you had to go through a whole big screening process prior to that too, before you even get to the White House. But yeah, even like we were even mentioning that, like right before us going in the gate was the Army band, and they were even going through their instruments. So it's like, you know, FBI, everything. But yeah, they went there. They had the dog was going around the van that we were in. They had like a mirror going under the van, all kinds of security issues. But
and you had to go through an FBI background check and that kind of thing well beforehand.
Yeah, for sure. And then when we got there, it was just, you know, they were so nice. And that, well, my contact at that point was a woman by the name of Danielle Westfall, very classy, just great lady. And she was just, you know, I always say that there are certain people in life that want to give people a chance, you know, and she was one of those people. And, you know, I think the music that she heard and probably the letter probably spoke stronger to her. And that's one of the things why we were there. So yeah, it was just amazing. We got in there and we finally went in, and we had to go into a holding area until it was our time. So we went into this area. It was in the West Wing, and then we were then when we went out to play, I guess our set was about an hour, and it was great because I played on this piano, and I have a great picture of Dave Brubeck playing for the Johnson administration on
that piano.
And I'm like, I have arrived. So it was cool though. so we had a saxophone all ready to go to have him play. Now, keep in mind, this is a day after the big Monica Lewinsky thing that happened.
Oh no!
And then it was a day after that he had to do something with Iraq or something like that. I don't know what was going on, but anyway, there's a lot going on there. But he was in a receiving line all night, so couldn't get a chance to play. But it was amazing. Later on that night, after our set, we hung around for another hour after that because we wanted to meet the president. We wanted to meet him.
Yeah.
So we were taken into this what they called this diplomatic room in the White House, where he meets all the foreign diplomats from all over the world. So here we are. We're standing there. I'm like, is this a dream? This is so surreal. You see the FBI agents coming in, going, okay, he's got. So he came in, and the Harlem Boys Choir was next to us in the same room.
Whoa.
They had just sang before us, and then he met with them, got a great picture with them. He came over to us, and he was tall. He was like 6'3" at that point.
I didn't realize.
And he was very tall. Yeah. And I'm 6 feet. So he had like a good 2 inches on me. And I said, Mr. President, I said, Eric Mintel, I said, we have a mutual friend in Dave Brubeck. He goes, Dave Brubeck, I just gave him the National Medal of the Arts Award. And Dave Brubeck also said I was the only elected official that could sing the bridge to Blue Rondo a la Turk. So, and that was really cool. And then we got a great picture with him, and that was something. So, that was just a surreal night. I mean, we went home just like everybody was, flying high.
Yeah. I have to ask you, did they feed you?
Yes, we did get food. Yes, we got food, and we were able to go in because we played right outside of the state dinner room. So
about how many people in attendance?
Oh, it was packed. I mean, there must have been 300-400 people there.
Whoa.
It was crazy. I think was it during that time? I think it was during that time something happened where things were in lockdown at the White House. So somebody had jumped the fence. So, and we didn't even know what was going on. We're just happily playing along, So that was amazing. And then, you're talking about the Kennedy Center. Then the following year, I just got a letter from the Kennedy Center saying that we'd like the Eric Mintel Quartet to perform at the Kennedy Center. Have no clue how where that came from, but my contact there, I remember her name was Tammy Ward. She was phenomenal, and we played there. And for as long as she had worked there, we were playing there for 10 times. So from like 99 to 2005, we played 10 times there, and that was a phenomenal. And then and then fast forwarding to the not the Kennedy Center, the United Nations, I again wanted to take jazz to another level. I wanted to see how could we reach more people. I wanted to be a goodwill ambassador for jazz. I really wanted to do that, and I still would like to do that. Yeah. So I was able to connect with a gentleman by the name of Eric Falt, who was part of UNESCO, and they're the arts and sciences part of the United Nations. He and I talked about putting together a jazz World Day type of event for the world, International Jazz Day. So I had a hand in coming up with what we have now is International Jazz Day, but Herbie Hancock now is the president of that whole organization, but that's okay. But we had talked about that early on, and so we had an opportunity to perform at the United Nations. Eric was taking a position in Paris, and we went out and did his going away party, so to speak, and got a chance to play for some dignitaries and people that were there from around the world. And so that was really amazing. That was even harder, like security to get into than the White House. It was insane.
I have to stop you there for a moment because I'm remembering at the height of the Cold War in the 50s and into the 60s, when the world was a hair trigger to a degree in terms of the Americans and the Soviets' relationship with each other was as low as it could get. And yet we did have a goodwill ambassador, and that was Mr. Louis Armstrong.
Yes.
The Soviets hated the American government, but the Russian people, the Soviet people, loved American jazz, and
Yes.
they loved these musicians. And that man made a difference in the world politic. May I respectfully suggest that you pick this up again? We're at a moment, I don't have to go into any detail for anybody to, need particulars on how, what a dark moment we're at right now, not just between the Americans and the Russians, the Soviets, the Russians, and everything that's going on in the Middle East, the potential for, war to spread, that we could really use. Well, the United Nations could always use some positive input, but, you know from your experience, this might just be the right moment to reapproach them with the idea of, World Jazz Day, or getting you and your group out there, other groups as well. And before we return to the White House, I want to come back to the world of the paranormal and ask you at what point you went from having the interest that you had had since you were a kid to crossing that line and saying, in the same way that you actualized your love of music and being a musician, that you said, I want to get out there and do something to have some kind of effect on the world of UFO and paranormal studies, ghost studies, for lack of a more descriptive term.
Sure.
How did you enter this world with Eric Mintel Investigates and whatever the precursor was?
Well, I had been, I've always been a filmmaker, always loved video, film, ever since I could remember.
Hmm.
And it was 2016, I think it was early 2016. I had been, of course, at that time, and still to this day, there were lots of paranormal shows on.
You bet.
And I looked at these shows and I was like, I could do that. I could do something like that. And I just started. Then Dave Antonell, bass player in the quartet, I asked him if he'd be interested in shooting some video and started to tell some stories about these things. And here we had played, 16, 17 years together. And I didn't realize he liked, filming as much as I did. So it was a nice thing. So he and I started doing some videos, and albeit they were very tongue in cheek to start off with, about stories and things like that. But as we went on, people started coming to us saying, look, would you be interested in doing a feature on my bed and breakfast or our restaurant? There's some things going on here that we can't explain. I said, absolutely. So, and I had a show called Talking Jazz with Eric Mintel, and it was in Princeton television a while ago. And so I had that outlet. And I said to them at Princeton, I said, could we do a paranormal show called Eric Mintel Investigates? Originally it was Bucks County Paranormal Investigations, but we changed it to Eric Mintel Investigates.
Yeah,
and they said,
give yourself more latitude.
Yeah, exactly. And so that started that, and now we're on a bunch of different cable stations, which is great. But it was those early days was phenomenal. And then, so that was 2016, and then it's just been steady ever since there. And we're covering everything from ghosts to UFOs to Bigfoot, dogman sightings. In 2017, now my paranormal partner that's in this now, Dominic Sattel, he's our spirit medium.
Yeah,
he and we went to high school together, and we practiced martial arts together. We did all kinds of stuff together, but never knew that he was a medium. And until he came into 29 years went like that. He got married, I got married, divorced and married. So we went, and then he came back through a mutual friend and said, I might be able to help you out on a lot of these investigations because I'm a medium. And I said, what? You never told me this. So having Dominic on the cases now, it's great because he kind of gives us a preview of what we're in store for, whether it's ghosts or whatever. But some of the cryptid investigations that we've been on, is completely out of his wheelhouse. And having had those encounters with those cryptids is still stuff that we are, still wrapping our heads around.
I know, even though this is hardly my area of specialty research, Pennsylvania has more than its fair share of the non-standard. And Bucks County certainly is an area with a good amount of well-documented anomalous activity in a number of areas. When you begin a program like you've done, you're looking for content. And at a certain point, it starts coming to you. And then at a certain point, something happens that goes a bit off the charts, that you don't have it has you.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a pleasant thing, that there are encounters that can be extremely unnerving for investigators. I've had my share in the UFO area, and I want to know at what point you're doing the show, and whether it's a UFO or a haunting case or a UFO case or cryptoid case, what have you, that the unexpected within the unexpected and the unknown happens. And the result is you and your team or your partner end up a bit overwhelmed, anxious, and not really sure what has just happened. Can you give us an example of that in your work?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah, we wind up in the middle of it. It's like Carl Kolchak on the Night Stalker. He's investigating the paranormal and gets caught in the middle of it, and that's what happens to us. And a prime example of that is the Beast of Bray Road in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and that was in October of 2021. And I'll condense the story real quick, but what happened to us is we went out and investigated these reports of this dog man people have been seeing for years, the Beast of Bray Road is supposed to be an upright canine dog man type creature, werewolf type creature, 6 to 7 feet tall. So we went on this farm of Lee Hampel, who has had all of this activity. And we went to this area that he called the bait area. And I had baited this area with steak bones the night before. But prior to this, I mean, some of the pictures that Lee had of this weird mist that comes up and on these trail cam pictures where you see the mist and you see a deer that he had put in this area, this bait, like a roadkill deer. You see this mist come over the deer, and 30 seconds later, the mist is gone and so's the deer. And so very, very weird stuff. But I went out, Peter, thinking, hey, we're going to have a great documentary. We're going to talk to some cool people, not ever thinking once that we'd encounter this thing. And we did on the night of October 3rd, 2021. We were on the farm of Lee. It was nighttime, and we had like a trifecta of activity. First was a UFO that we saw that went over, was not a satellite, wasn't anything like that, not a shooting star. You could see other planes around this, and all of a sudden this thing makes a 45-degree angle and blinks out. That was the first thing. Then we heard the howl, and the howl that this thing made, and it was very close, and we had very small microphones with us, like lavalier microphones. It was that loud that it picked it up from like 100 yards away. To me, it sounded like a man screaming in this field. It was like this low guttural scream, growl, yell coming. And then the third thing was this weird mist that came up from the field that we were in that was messing with all of our electronics. So this was something that was happening. And then we have no protection whatsoever. We have a flashlight and a radio. That's it. And that was my stupidity, thinking that we wouldn't encounter anything. But the thing that really got us was we shine the light over into the corn. If you could envision this, the field that we were in is a hay field. The hay is gone. It's already down, but there's corn on either sides of us, and it's like a big rectangle. So where we were over in this area and where we heard the howl, we shine the light over there into the corn, and there were eyes darting like this in and out of the corn. And you could see eye shine. And that was it. I said, you know what? We got to get out of here.
That doesn't seem like animal behavior.
And it was high. It was high up in the corn.
Yeah.
Like 6 or 7 feet, but it was like stalking us. It was like something was looking through the corn like this. And that's what got me. I mean, initially we were freaked out because of the sounds, but that told me, okay, we need to get the hell out of here because this thing's telling us this is its territory. A lot of people were like, why didn't you stay out there longer? I'm like, I wasn't going to wait around to find out because I've got 3 other people here, and our safety is more important than an investigation. And Peter, the crazy thing is the entire town of Elkhorn lost power that night.
Was there any conventional explanation put forward for that you were aware of?
There was no storms, nothing like that. And it was just 2:00 in the morning, boom, in the entire town. And so the next morning I had in my hotel room, I had brought a stick back from the field. It must have been on my boot. And Dominic goes, "You brought it back with you, didn't you?" But, who knows? But it was very, very odd.
It's a good time to observe that for folks that are interested in the paranormal, UFOs, the things that we're talking about here, and there are millions, if not tens of millions of people that are interested to one degree or another, certainly. It's not really a cavalier attitude, but in this world that we live in where, the internet is such a double-edged sword. It's this miraculous source of information, and there's so much unadulterated crap on it. And for me, a lot of our behavior goes back to the iconic words on the X-Files poster that we see in the very first episode of that very popular show, I Want to Believe.
Yeah.
And, there are a lot of things that we don't want to believe, but it's, I want to believe that is not the case. And I think there's an attitude that settles into certain fans, viewers, listeners of shows like this one right now, or your program, of this is entertainment. I hope it is entertaining for people, but it's entertainment based in real information, if non-standard information. And there are those kind of disconnect moments where people are, well, why didn't you stay there longer?
Yeah.
Because I was scared and I wanted to get out of there is the reason I didn't stay there longer. This wasn't a good time. We weren't there to entertain you. We were actually there to learn something, to explore something, to see if we could get behind a mystery, to crack a code. And this got kind of out of control. If you had been there with us, you would have wanted to go away also.
Exactly.
But it's easy when you're, here curled up in front of your computer screen or big screen TV and watching it. And wait a minute, that's not the ending I wanted to this show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, and we were on site. We were boots on the ground. And that's one thing I like what you just said there. We are truth-based investigating.
Yeah.
No gimmickry or anything like that. We don't use REM when we're doing like a ghost investigation, right? We're not going to use REM pods. We're not going to use spirit boxes or anything like that, only because they're going to give a false reading sometimes because of the equipment that you're using. Those things are, detecting electromagnetic energy. They're going to detect the cameras going off, and things like that. And they don't, also hearing aids. They'll go off if people are having, have hearing aids. It's that delicate. But we utilize Dominic and our other spirit medium, Julie, but they're phenomenal. But I'll tell you what, you're right. Being on site and being in that moment was incredible. And here's the other thing. So we did a follow-up to that investigation following year in April of 2022. We didn't experience it this time. We didn't encounter it. But what we did encounter was we had a town hall meeting at the Elkhorn Library. Over 144 people showed up to tell their story of seeing this thing, describing it exactly the same way, every single one of them. Also, and the way it's up on 2 legs, when it's on 2 legs, it looks like it's gliding. And then when it's on all 4s, it's very, very fast. And then fast forward, your good friend and mine, Tom Carey, Tom and I looked into the Beast of Bryn Athyn, which Bryn Athyn is an area outside of Philadelphia that has had another dogman sighting. And they call it the Beast of Bryn Athyn. Well, those witnesses described the same creature as Elkhorn. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it.
Tom Carey happens to be one of the finest, most courageous, most ethical, most scholarly researchers that I know and have ever met in my life. He really sets the bar very high for the rest of us, and also happens to be a great guy.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, because again, like the way that you approach music, because you wanted to do it, because you had a passion for it, because you like the way it feels to perform, the contact it gives you with people, you didn't come into the kind of paranormal investigations you did with scientific theories already worked out in your head that you were going to try to validate. We're all we've got that invisible divining rod in our hands, and we're seeing where it dips, but we're just schnooks trying to wrap our head around it. I remember years ago, the late great Bud Hopkins, in addressing some of the really insulting, condescending reactions that not skeptics. We all need to be skeptics in this work, especially people like you and I.
Yeah.
We've got to apply that. Debunker is a whole nother area. Debunkers actually have the intellectual arrogance to know that certain things simply aren't, because they can't be. Therefore, there's something else. And therefore, it's their self-assigned job to pat us on the heads and give us their pseudoscientific explanations for what they hope it is, because if it's what we think it is, which is genuinely unknown, then they've got a problem, and they don't like having that problem. What I'm saying here is, in your investigations into that area that are generally referred to as haunting or ghost-related, you're entering into an area that a lot of people know it's nonsense. It's mystical bullshit that, is driven by this desire to think that, there are ghosts and that spirits linger and all of this. Who are any of us to say what isn't? And I'm wondering if in the course of your investigations, you have started to come to a point where you can say, I don't know exactly what this is, but this is what I think it is, or may be, that's responsible for what we call hauntings or ghosts. How can you pick that up for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I like the lead in, because a lot of the, especially in the ghost situation, I tend to go into that, to be honest with you, skeptically. I don't know what that is. And I'm always like, I want to look at it from like maybe a scientific factor of like, okay, so what's really going on here? Is it, pipes in the basement making those sounds? Is it, animal on the roof that's making those footsteps? But having said that, but having caught what we've caught on camera, I'm a very firm believer now that there's a real thin veil from here to there. And at the end of the day, people are seeing something. Now they're doing like experiments with the light spectrum, whereas during the day, we don't, obviously we don't see these things, but at night, for some reason, and through night vision, we're able to see this other light spectrum, whether it's orbs coming through or something. And a prime example of that was, we were in Georgia, in Fitzgerald, Georgia, this was September of 2021. And we did an investigation there of this art center that was in Fitzgerald. Part of the Fitzgerald Arts Council invited us down there, the Tourism Bureau. And we were in the Carnegie Art Center, it was called. Well, a week before, they had this African art that had been in this art center. That this African art, I think they said it was the art was something that where the spirit of that person was infused into the art. It was some kind of energy was infused into that art. I didn't know how to approach that or how to think about that. But the art wasn't in there when we were there. But then we were there, I was standing in an area that an African warrior statue had been standing, and on camera, and people could see this on video that we have, there's an orb that just comes up right behind me. And there was something in there, and our magnetometer, the only equipment that we're using is a magnetometer that checks the electromagnetic energy, maybe an EVP every once in a while to see if there's anything, but mainly the mediums. But this magnetometer was going off the charts in this area as well. So there was something there that we couldn't touch it. We couldn't do anything, but it was there because you could see it on camera. And
explain to our audience what EBT is.
EVP is electro voice phenomena. So look at yourself as like a little handheld recorder. If you see a lot of people on the shows going, if there's a spirit here with us, make a sound. So they're recording that. And the idea is that this particular device is going to pick up sounds that our ears just can't hear.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of times it's worked for us, but a lot of times it doesn't work. So that's kind of like, I'm on the fence with that one, but sometimes it does work. And I did one time catch, it sounded like a woman humming in this one hotel that we were investigating. So, and I got to say, Peter, within 20 minutes of an investigation, whether Dominic's on the case or what, it's usually Dominic. I always say he's the magnet for these things, but stuff happens, just immediately happens. And when we do these cases, this is another thing that your listeners should know too. I never tell our mediums anything about the places that we're going to be investigating.
Good.
And so they don't have any of that knowledge. I know from talking to the owners, like I don't have that feeling like to go in to a space and feel those spirits like they do. But I'll get all of that info and the history and all of the hauntings and all that kind of those stories. I keep that to myself till we get to the site. And then it's great to see them on camera going right to those hot spots. And then, what happens? A story starts unfolding and it just unfolds. And then another story that nobody even thought about starts unfolding. And it's just amazing. And that happens all the time.
People usually divide up into folks who are primarily audio sensitive, that the world of sounds and the human voice and verbal communication and music dominate their sensibilities, or they're visually inclined. Yes, they listen, they hear, but it's what they see that impacts on their lives the most, or the kinesthetic. Of course, they see and they hear, but it's the world of hearing, of feeling, of what's going on inside of themselves regarding what's going on around them. Most of us, of course, obviously are a mixture of all three. Things tend to dominate. But if you are visually, if visual images are what really dominate for you, then, somebody can say like you, well, we picked up this sound or this audio, and we'll go, big deal. What did you see with your own eyes? What can I see that you captured on film?
Right.
In your experience, Eric, let's say in a building that would be archetypical for non-standard activity, an old building, an historic building, maybe even, and there are, of course, all over Pennsylvania, buildings that predate the American Revolution, or at least go back to then.
Oh, yeah.
An experience that you and your team or your colleague have had where you have seen something that you still can't reconcile, that still maybe freaks you out a bit, that couldn't have been staged in any way for, your benefit, although why people would take the time to do that, it's not like there's money to be made. Go right to an experience that you have had on the job, so to say, where it's been something you've experienced with your eyes.
Well, just recently, we played at the Hillstead Museum in Connecticut in early December. And we were right before the concert, and while people were coming in, we're off in a room in the house. And this is an old house. The museum's beautiful museum. Well, this is the first time I saw a ghost. I mean, I honest to God saw this like flash of ghost going from the kitchen to the upstairs. And it was this just white flash that went like this. And I knew it wasn't any cars or anything like that because there were no windows where we were. I just saw this and just caught it out of the corner of my eye. That was just recently. But what happened, which we're still wrapping our heads around, was what not only we saw, but how it affected one of our clients. So we did a video called Hallowed Grounds of the Homestead. It's they have an architectural company, Architectural Salvage, called New Spirit, Old Soul. Great stuff. Beautiful. Well, on this property is a 1759 farmhouse.
Okay.
So there has been all kinds of weird stuff going on there that the owner, Beth, has been feeling this energy for a long time.
Does she live in that farmhouse?
She does not live there, but there are businesses there. Her brother lives there. Whoa. And I think maybe sometimes but they have parties and they have stuff that goes on.
Okay.
But she always feels things when she goes in there. So we do this video and we're upstairs in the bedroom where this activity's been at the highest at this. Well, Dominic's in there and I'm in there in the room, and the magnetometer is going off the charts in this one area. And as I walk by this dresser, I see the flowers on the table move. And I'm thinking, could it have been the floorboard that moved that? But it was solid. So there was nothing there. And I said to Beth and to everybody in the room, I said, guys, I think I just saw this plant.
No wind, no
wind, no nothing. Okay. No fans, no nothing.
Okay.
I think I just saw this move. Well, with that, Beth is a designer as well, interior designer. She just turned from, and Beth is really chill. She's very nice. Well, she turned into, I did not put that there. I did not put that plant there. That is not where I put it. And with that, she was hit with this devastating emotional energy that came into her, which we later found out was the spirit of this woman, Elizabeth, that we found out later that used to be in that bedroom, that used to be in that room. Well, it turns out there was a huge story that unfolded after that, but she had a complete meltdown on camera from being hit by this spirit. And this was somebody that I did not know this person. This was someone else. This was not Beth. So that was something that we witnessed, and it's all caught on camera. It's called Hallowed Grounds of the Homestead.
I have to ask this. You don't feel in any way that she was theatricalizing this or taking advantage of an opportunity to promote, her business?
Yeah, and absolutely. Yeah, I thought for sure at first, yes. It's like we were saying, well, what's going on here? And all of a sudden, she's starting to hyperventilate. And we said, okay, we need to get her out. And she was literally in the hallway being consoled. And she was like really crying. And this is kind of, and I'm pretty good at discerning the bullshit from the truth. And this to me was something that was something out of the ordinary. The way she just acted was just so weird, how she just turned from one thing to another. And then she's in the hallway and just sobbing. And then her friend Renee goes in the same room, and Renee is another one that is sensitive. She completely starts sobbing and starts getting this emotional breakdown. So I said to Beth, when I'm editing this video, I said, Beth, because there was a lot more on there that I didn't put on because it was like mass chaos. And it's like all hell broke loose. And I was like, well, I said, Beth, do you want me to put all this stuff? There's a lot on here. Do you want me to put this in here? She's like, yes, if that's how it happened, that's how we have to have it. I'm like, okay. Because I'm a respectful guy. I don't want to, put something out there that's going to put people in a weird position. But that was just something that I thought to myself, wow. And it was just something was very odd. And then it turns out Dominic was feeling the spirit of Elizabeth. And then it turns out, we found out later that her husband had an affair with one of the workers on the property, and the worker, I guess the son died or something like that, and it was buried on the property, and this Elizabeth wasn't able to leave that threshold of the room, and that's why it had all of this weird energy in there. So it was crazy. It was something that, how could you make that up? It was like on the spot like that. you know.
Eric, for my viewers and listeners who would like to become your viewers and listeners, where can they find Eric Mintel Investigates?
They could find it on YouTube, Eric Mintel Investigates on YouTube. And then I put some videos up on, we have a dedicated website now for Eric Mintel Investigates. It's called ericmintelinvestigates.org.
Good.
Really hard titles to come up with. But yeah, they could find it. And then, of course, on Facebook at Eric Mintel Investigates. And on my regular Facebook page, I'm posting all kinds of paranormal stuff all the time.
Let's go on to a related subject, which is at a certain point, coming from your work on the program, your private passion about this, being somebody who is comfortable putting together events that involve audiences, you decided that you wanted to organize a paranormal UFO conference. And that is going to be happening in March and hopefully become an annual event in Bucks County. First, can you tell us how this idea started and about what people can expect for this event coming up in March?
Well, thank you so much. Yes, it's going to be on March 9th, March 9th from 12 to 7.
A Saturday or Sunday?
It's a Saturday.
Okay.
And it's going to be held at Bucks County Community College in Newtown, Pennsylvania. And it's in their arts center, which is the Zlock Performing Arts Center right there on the campus.
Great.
Beautiful auditorium. We've got, so that all came about because I was like, wow, we don't really have, as we were talking earlier, we don't really have a lot of really great paranormal conferences in our area. And, we had the MUFON conference, which went away. And now in Bucks County, I figured, what, now's the time. Let's have a paranormal conference. I've got a name in not only the jazz world, but in the paranormal world. And thankfully, like I said before, my audience is following me into the paranormal world because we'll be doing a concert and, we've got people yelling out in the audience saying, we love your paranormal show, and it's so cool. And it's like, and I love that. And one of the things is, as a performer and as being on TV, I like the excitement factor, but being on these investigations, the excitement factor just happens. I mean, it's amazing. But with this conference, it's going to be so much fun. We were able to get Nick Pope as our featured speaker, which I know you're very good friends with as well. And we've got Tom Carey is going to be a speaker, Bigfoot researcher Eric Spinner. Bill Burns is going to be one of the speakers as well. And then Jim Krug from Altoona, Pennsylvania. He's one of the speakers as well. He's a MUFON section director out there. And we're going to talk about it all. Jim's going to talk about aliens on the moon. Tom's going to talk about Roswell. Bill's going to talk about UFOs in the White House. And Nick's going to also talk about the new documentation of what's going on with the UFO disclosure. And then, of course, myself and Dominic Sattel are going to be talking as well, talking about dogman sightings and cryptids and Bigfoot encounters that we've had. And then we've got vendors that are going to be there. We're still working on vendors. And then we've got food trucks. So it's going to be a nice, and this is the first time that we've ever done this, first time that I've ever done anything like this. And tickets are selling really well. So this far out, that's a good sign. So we're going to, like you said, I'm hoping to make this like a yearly event.
For folks who are not familiar with some of these names, Nick Pope, longtime resident of the United States, is English and had a career working with the Ministry of Defense. Tom Carey, again, one of the world's leading experts on Roswell, and his books, written with his longtime co-author, Don Schmidt, are among the best UFO investigative books I've ever read, especially in the witness-driven accounts. And of course, there's a great deal more evidence than just anecdotal. Right. Bill Burns, longtime editor of UFO magazine when it was still around, and all three of them multiply published authors. What's this gig going to cost people to go to?
$45 the entire day.
Okay.
And it's all, and for all the speakers, and And for the vendors that want to be there, there's not a bad table in the house. Tables are provided. We're going to get a lot of heavy foot traffic, so people are selling all kinds of paranormal merchandise and all kinds of really neat paranormal crafts and things like that. And
where do people go to register for this event?
They could go and get the ticket link right on my website for the Eric Mintel Investigates. There's a ticket link on there. They could also go right through Bucks County Community College, the ZLOCK, ZLOCK Performing Arts Center, and they have a ticket link as well. But my link is right there for that, and people can go right there.
This is a good time to get back to your music. And we do have another segment. Can you set this up first and tell us what we're about to see and hear, of course?
I'm not sure what you have next.
Well, then, Mr. Race Hobbs, would you play it? And then we'll go from there.
It's
That was incredibly brief.
That video was courtesy of my girlfriend Sherry Goulding, and yeah, that was at the New Hope Winery back in late November. We had a concert. We're doing a yearly concert there, and that was a great crowd, sold out house, and that was an original tune I wrote called King's Journey that we usually end with. People love that, and then. Strangely enough, I just booked a paranormal video to do at that winery. So we're going to be shooting that in March, at the end of March.
At this point, are you more drawn to the UFO mystery, anomalous creatures like Dogman and Bigfoot, or ghosts, spirits? Do you have a natural inclination toward any one more than another? Just curious.
Yeah, no, I think the UFO enigma is fascinating. The Bigfoot and Dogman sightings are fascinating to me. And the ghost situation is probably third on the list because just because I haven't had those experiences. But those other two I've had major experiences with and really changed my perspective on what's out there.
I was going to say, again, for folks who are kind of going through these doors for the first time and trying to educate themselves on a 101 kind of introductory basis, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, abominable snowmen, whatever we want to call these hominids, Pennsylvania has more documented activity than a lot of other states than I could name. Can you tell us how you got more involved in researching them or investigating them, and how close you feel you have come to actually kind of being in the room with them, so to say?
That is a very good question, because you know what? I don't know if you're reading my mind, but this is exactly what happens. Like when we get on those investigations, that's what's going through my mind. Is like, what's going to happen tonight? Well, as recently, and we were in the same room with this thing as recently as September 2nd, we did a follow-up investigation of Bigfoot in the New Jersey Pine Barrens.
Okay, yeah.
So going back a week after we got back from Elkhorn in 2021, we did our first Bigfoot investigation in the Pine Barrens. Had a major encounter there because when talking to the researchers, we all heard a whoop coming from the background. And initially I was like, I saw some of those shows initially and I'm like, they're whooping and hollering for Bigfoot. And I'm like, is that what they really sound like? And when we heard that, I was like, I'll be damned if that's not what we heard. So what got me was Eric Spinner, who's going to be at the conference, his wife, Heather, she answers it back, and she goes, whoop, and it answers her back. And they're having this conversation back and forth, not once, but 5 or 6 times. And that was in 2021. Well, we went back in, and we caught it all on video too. And we went back in September 2nd of 2023, just last September. And this time we went to the same area that we were in. We sat in base camp, and we're sitting there talking, listening to the surroundings. And Art, one of the researchers, again, who was talking to Dominic initially, that's when we heard that whoop before. Art is, unfortunately, he's going through some cancer treatment right now, and he's got medications that he's got to take, but he's doing great. To look at him, you wouldn't think anything was wrong, but he's doing great, and he has to take these medications. Well, he's saying to us while we're sitting here, is hey, guys, I don't know if it's the medications that I'm taking or what, but my heart is really racing right now. Well, with that, we hear a branch crack behind us, and we all flipped around, and the camera thankfully went around too. And there we saw something just hit the branch, and it was going like this. The branch was about 7 feet up. And then for 2 seconds, I saw yellow eyes up about 7 feet, and then they disappeared. And then Eric and I could hear this thing running back into the swamp, whatever it was. So right there, I'm like, are you kidding me? It's amazing. You're muted again. I can't hear you.
When you talk about being in the Pine Barrens, this is a large ongoing area.
Oh, yeah.
In New Jersey. You can kind of be on the edge of it and have civilization behind you, or really in the Pine Barrens.
We were in. We were
okay.
5 miles. We were 5 miles into the Pine Barrens by truck, and in the middle of nowhere. I mean, no houses around. No one would want to be caught back there at all. It's just, and you could easily get lost in that area.
Oh yes, yeah.
So we were there, and we experienced this thing, and it was on video, and it totally it blindsided us, because we were like, we didn't think we were going to catch any. We thought that was just an isolated incident, but there is something down there.
Do you feel that this is like a kind of man beast, a species that is, again, related to us the same way that other advanced primates are, that somehow has managed in different corners of the world, this being one of them, to avoid detection to a greater degree and continue to breed and have lives? And, obviously, these areas are getting smaller and smaller around the world every year for obvious reasons, human overpopulation or what have you. But what's your theory about what these creatures are? And do you see them as highly intelligent or more basic, like an advanced ape, although some of them are smarter than a lot of people we've met.
Yeah.
What's your gut level thought about this? Or have you compared notes with other individuals who research and investigate them? Because there are hyper specialists, and that's what they do. They're not interested in other areas of the paranormal. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think my gut instinct is, and because we experienced the same kind of energy in Elkhorn, I think it could be an interdimensional type thing that's going on.
Let's talk about that.
Because you know how it is. People see something, and the person standing right next to you doesn't see it. And and in our research, I really believe this, that, and you'll probably agree with me on this, is that people are picked to experience these things, or they're chosen to have these experiences. And I really think that's what happened to us in Elkhorn. I think that's what happened in the Pine Barrens. And the reason why I'm saying interdimensional is because when we were in Lee's field, Scott, one of our fans who made the whole video happen was Ellen Collins. She brought her son out, who is he's a great drone operator and does these very high-end drones. Well, he had the drone going over top of us in this field as we were doing some reconnaissance, and he has to wear these virtual reality glasses to see where he's going. Well, while we were in the section of the field, we disappeared off of his radar screen.
Oh.
And it was the weirdest thing. And it was over in that area that Lee has had all this activity. So he lifts the glasses up and sees that we're still there, but there was something in the middle there. And so could this thing be coming in and out of our reality? That was their theory. A lot of the people that I have talked to are more likely leaning towards. And the other thing is too, a lot of the Bigfoot guys don't want to talk about the Bigfoot UFO connection, but there are those connections to that, which I don't know. That's another thing that we're constantly looking at. And the one thing that's fascinating about this is that it doesn't seem to be any definitive answer. You're always on the edge of that answer, but then there's something. It's like infinite. There's something else that could be explained, or there's something else that you have to look at. That's the part of this research that I love.
We're already in our last 4 minutes. Let's go back to the White House and tell us about your second performance there and who you're performing for. So
in 2011, I wanted to, again, try to take the group to another level. My girlfriend, Sherry, says, why don't you call the White House again? And I go, I said, no way. I go, that's just like, no way. That was just a one-time thing. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. So she said, give him a call. Just give him a call. So thankfully, I had the phone number still on my phone.
Of course.
And I called and I said, hi, it's Eric Mintel. Do you have any availability for any kind of concerts? And they said, what's your availability for December of this year? So, and they had all my information and stuff. So here we played again. It was like December 11th or something like that of 2011. And we played for Obama and his wife, Michelle. Phenomenal people and great jazz lovers. And what the most fascinating part about that was when the Marine Guard takes you down to meet the president. And they said, Mr. President, Eric Mintel Quartet. And again, I went up to the president and I shook his hand and I said, Mr. President, you and I have a mutual friend in Dave Brubeck. And he goes, Dave Brubeck was the very first concert I went to go see with my father when I was a kid.
Oh.
So, I mean, Dave Brubeck is such a strong force in my life. All of these, it's just wild.
That's wonderful.
So, yeah, it was just amazing. And so then I feel this tap on my shoulder. Here it's Sherry slapping me on the shoulder because Michelle was behind me and she wanted to, shake my hand. So we got, so it was a lot of fun.
That's
Sherry.
wonderful.
Sherry's she's always saying, boy, that was one hell of a first date.
I was going to say, when she tells you to make a call, make the call.
Exactly. I listen to her all the time. Believe me.
I love it. Eric, it's been great spending this time with you. Obviously, we will stay in touch. We are a mutual admiration society.
Absolutely.
And are you thinking at some point in the future that you might write a book about all these experiences, or you've got your hands full doing what you're doing?
No, but you are on our wavelength tonight. Because Sherry and I were just talking about, I've started writing. I've got about 125 pages written of Eric Mintel Investigates, casebook investigations.
Folks, this is not something we discussed beforehand. This is just
not at all. Not at all.
Looking for a line as we go out.
And listen, this is what improvisation's all about, right? Because we're improving, right? So yeah. It's amazing. And next year, Peter, you are going to be one of the speakers for our conference. So we can't wait for that. That's going to be a lot of fun.
That's great. I love Bucks County. It's a beautiful part of Pennsylvania, and I haven't been there in too long.
Oh, yeah.
This is Peter Robbins. The show has been yet once again, Meanwhile Here on Earth, with Eric Mintel of Eric Mintel Investigates, and the White House, and the Kennedy Center, and the UN, and Bucks County. Eric, it's been a pleasure. Take care and see you around the campus.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Bye, folks. See you next week.